Right. Hello, everybody. I'm just getting something out of my eyeball there. Welcome back to Rule the Roost. Joined today by Mr. Charlie Parrish. How you doing, mate? How's it going?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Jack. Mildly furious, of course, the day after one of the more humbling Sundays of our Tottenham supporting lives, but I'm doing all right. It's lovely to see you.
Did and you, mate? Did you have that moment at 3-0 down at half time away to Everton, where you were kind of thinking we might be on our way to losing 5-0 or so to Everton here? That kind of when that chaos brain kicks in.
And we know it well. I mean, the clearest comparison that I have was the Newcastle Stellini game, the 6-1, 5-0 down at half time, where you just felt like any sort of chaos could ensue. Like we could have easily conceded six before half time. And just that, I think Jack Pitt-Brooke in The Athletic described the sort of glazed look that they all seem to have. And, the defenders are all just sort of shrugging at each other like, I thought you had him. No, no, no. I thought, what? What's going on? And, that sort of sense of desperation coupled with trying out a new formation, like I think Stellini did that day where he ditched the wing, sort of the opposite actually of what we saw yesterday, where he ditched the Conte wing backs for a back four, and it went horribly wrong. And then, poor old Ange has decided to, with one training session, that trying out a back five would be a wise thing to do. And our players looking like they had never once had any kind of clear idea about how to play that way. It's just extraordinary. Like one of the weirdest halves of football I can remember for ages.
It's quite sad in a way, like because Ange is obviously rattled because he's been so bullish in the past about the way he plays, his approach to football, the fact he's not going to change for anybody, and so on and so forth. That he completely, completely mixed things up. And I've seen some people say like, "Oh no, he wasn't being reactive. He's done this before. He played this way when he was in charge of the Aussie national team." But that sort of feels a bit disingenuous to me. This did feel quite reactive, and I'm not. The thing is, I'm not actually really trying to frame that in a negative sense around Ange Postecoglou. I've been quite outspoken on my feelings toward him the past few weeks. But the funny thing is, the worse this gets, the more my feeling for him it softens. Like I would say, my stance towards him softens somewhat because I actually just get more annoyed with the board and everything. I mean,
Mm.
do you have a level of sympathy for him with everything
I
that's going on
I
right now?
do, because yesterday felt like a real throw of the dice. It felt desperate to completely abandon his system that, as you say, he's been so wedded to. Um, for an away trip to Goodison, a team that, what they've not scored in, hadn't scored in five of the last seven games, I think it was, and just absolutely woeful. To to be that concerned about the form of his team that he completely, sort of jettisons his style of football for a trip to Goodison Park. And then afterwards, when asked, he just sounded really, oh, well, I only had 11 players, so I just had to figure out a system that kind of worked. Which, I don't know if I hold much truck with, because I think he could have easily, albeit he's obviously hamstrung by who he's got available to him, but it felt to me like, you could have moved Gray into midfield, you could have parked Madison on the left wing, you could have even had Madison as a sort of false nine and still played his regular sort of 4-3-3. But I am softening to him because I think it takes, and obviously there's a huge it's going to say huge minority, it's growing, of Spurs fans that have just absolutely had enough of him. But
Mm.
I think that the hand he sees, the hand he's been dealt, um, you know, is pretty poor. And I think, I mean by that, the injuries, which is probably nothing the like of which I've seen as a Spurs fan. I mean, I kind of think back to, I don't know, like what was it, Rory Allen and Neil Fenn playing up front in a cup tie at Old Trafford for sort of this level of throwing players into the deep end.
Emergency Andy Booth loans and the like,
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, what in the Andy booths are we about to get served up in terms of emergency striker signing? But then even we talk, I bring up the striker thing. the Solanke news is obviously, you know, just the last in a long line of injury kind of misfortune. But because of who we're run by, we are now left with the striking options that our chairman decided were ample, having sold our best ever player and greatest ever goal scorer on the eve of the season. You know, if you think back, we were left with Richarlison, who had scored one league goal the previous season, and Son Heung-min, our best winger at the time. Those were the striking options that, you know, our ownership decided were enough for a new manager to contend in the Premier League with, having sold Harry Kane from, you know, from under him on the night before the season started. So, you know, my big concern going into the last sort of 10 or so days of the transfer window is that, you know, Levy, having watched a fairly robust cameo from Richarlison yesterday, is simply going to say to him, sorry, pal, I signed you to, you know, I've signed you £100 million worth of striker. There's two of them when Solanke comes back. What am I doing getting you another one? You're fine. And it's that sort of it's that thinking that I think has got us into this, you know, into this predicament. I think Levy is always able to, you know, manipulate the numbers in a way that you know he can suggest that he has put his hand in his pocket. You can say, well, look, Brennan Johnson cost, you know, 50 million or whatever it was. But I think as you know, you and I have said in the past, Jack, you know, they're spending 50 million in transfer fees, and there's fronting up for the wages that, you know, the elite players really demand. And, you know, Dominic Solanke is not going to be demanding the same wage that, you know, say that Sesko guy that Arsenal are sniffing around from Leipzig. You know, they're not the same. They're not the same. It's not the same transfer. The transfer fees might be similar, but in terms of ambition, in terms of what you're actually having to fork out for, it's night and day. And that's, you know, without always wanting to compare us to Arsenal, that's sort of the problem, right? Is that we do these deals that on the face of it look reasonably ambitious, but actually when you get to the sort of brass tacks of it all, it's not. It's just, it's, you know, and again, you and I have said this on multiple occasions over the past. It's this sort of masquerading as a super club. It's doing everything, you know, but actually that last bit to really, you know, solidify, to calcify your argument that you belong. We just won't do it. It's, you know, it's a kind of 60-minute makeover. We'll just, you know, stick a bit of paint on and throw up a bit of MDF, but it's all going to come, you know, as soon as the cameras have left. That you know, that shit's getting torn down.
Yeah,
It's that problem for us.
the MDF paneling, isn't it? It's that sense, isn't it? That, like we've said, you know, it's the sense that if we're successful by approaching the game in that way, that'll be nice. But
Mm,
we're not going out. We're not going to break the bank to try and win. Don't you see? And it's always tied up in the thing. So many excuses are made for it in terms of it's always tied up in. Well, don't you realise? Don't you realise how difficult it is to win the Premier League? Don't you realise how much you actually have to spend to compete alongside Manchester City and these other sort of, you know, litany of super clubs? But it's so galling for the club to plead poverty. At least maybe if they don't directly do it, they do it through their way in which they brief the press constantly to come out with these type of sound bites. But to plead poverty, but then at the same hand be so smug and to be so triumphant with the way in which financial figures are announced all the time. The
mm,
profitability of the club, you know, this fantastic business model that Daniel is the mastermind behind, you know, as ever, as we're always told. Look at how well we're doing. You know, you've had old Claude Littner off the Apprentice, fully having Daniel Levy's back all over Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now. Um, and I sort of the point I made to him is like, if you had him on the penultimate week of The Apprentice when you're doing those interviews, you'd be reading him the riot act. So don't come and speak to us proles in this way that we should just, you know, sit down and be happy with our lot. You know,
and I think that's
it's
telling,
very
isn't it? And
frustrating.
I think there's tons of us that have, you know, stopped short of being fully kind of Levy out, Enoch out over the years because well, for plenty of reasons. I think you've got the, better the devil you know attitude. We've all been wary of some kind of evil oil overlords coming in and presenting us a moral conundrum that none of us have really wanted to, to contend with. You've got owners that might just be complete charlatans and not have the readies and leave us completely, sort of stuck and facing ruin. And I think one of the sort of most frustrating parts of it is they have done, like, they've got us right there, and that's the thing, right? Is that on so many occasions we've been right there, but for that last bit of investment, but for that little push, that little need to be, cavalier in the spending. And I think where most of us have reached the point now where, we have gone over that, we've sort of crossed the Rubicon and become sort of full ENIC outers, is because we know the money is there if they wanted to. And I think it's that it's most of us now can't align the fact that they want us to pay, top dollar to watch these matches. They want us to be thought of in this super club bracket, but they won't actually, take that plunge themselves. And that's fine. It's their money. They can do what they want, but don't sort of string us along thinking that this is the journey that they're intending to take us on, when we now have decades of evidence to really prove out that that isn't what, they're here to do for Tottenham. I think, I try and tell myself that daily in trying to balance my own expectations for what I'm watching, and tell myself, oh, it's fine. I just want a Poch type manager back that I can get behind, and a crop of young players that play nice football. But even that's riddled with difficulty, and it's the league is a lot tougher than it was 5-6 years ago, and you've got Bournemouths and Fulhams and Brightons and all sorts of clubs that have
Nottingham
outsmarted
Forest.
us. Yeah, who haven't necessarily outsmarted anyone. I mean, they're kind of an example in a way of just like, do you know what? You just buy a shit ton of players, you get your rap on the knuckles for sort of overspending, and then come out the other side and actually you've got a really good team. And I'm not saying that we need to, go crazy or put ourselves into financial peril, but we would have to do so much to get ourselves into any sort of financial peril. When you look at that sort of revenue to wage ratio and how far out in front we are in terms of being the most conservative spenders in that regard. That's the number that I look at in terms of this isn't being taken seriously as a trophy success winning operation. It's a business, and that's fine, and more fool us in a way for as many people have tweeted in recent days, weeks. They have showed us who they are many, many times, and after a while, it's on us to sort of just make fun of ourselves for assuming it might be any different. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough, man.
Well, it's tough in the respect that people often say when I do these type of pods, or when things get to these kind of pinch points, and I'm moaning about ENIC for a few weeks, as it does happen, Danny, is you'll either get some people, a lot of people really, who will say, bang on, agree with everything you're saying. It really is. It's nice to know that other people feel this way, that I'm not just some kind of wobble-headed whatever. And I do think most people really don't want to make it their personality to be complaining about the chairman, to be complaining about the board of a football club. Really, the majority of us just want to enjoy our football club. We want to watch our team playing well. Like you say, you want to get behind a team, you want to get behind a group of players. And doing this type of stuff, it's not fun. You don't get off on it. And the point will then be made, well, what you've got to do is like stop going, stop buying tickets, stop. And yeah, fair enough and whatever. But at the end of the day, we all know that Daniel Levy and ENIC aren't going to go anywhere unless many billions of pounds come their way. And even then, there's not a guarantee, from what we hear, even then there's not a guarantee that Levy will leave, that he won't still be in some way running the club, that it's almost like he comes with the club, is the kind of the theory that's been floated. So when we do have these conversations, I think sometimes it's not it's not with any intention to be like, right, we're gonna bring the system down now. We're gonna whatever. It's simply just putting the world to rights and just venting a bit, because I think we all know the problem is, and you put it perfectly before, and I'm always referencing you on here, Charlie, because you said to me that time the most frustrating thing about ENIC is that they do spend money, but they never spend money at a time like when Tottenham have just, for example, come second in a Premier League or just got into a Champions League final. Well, we actually did after that,
Mm,
but that's only because the team fell to pieces. But we never invest from that, as you said, the position of strength. When we're at the top of the wave, when we're there, it's always, well, we don't need to do anything because we're already great, we're brilliant. There's never that push to get us that little step further. And what will
mm,
probably will, I mean, fingers crossed, what we will see this January is some money dropped on a Jonathan David or whoever, right? One of the names that sort of floats around. We'll see them maybe drop, and again, I say fingers crossed, 40, 50 million pounds to help Ange Postecoglou through this kind of injury crisis. But then the kick on from that, like you say, will be when it comes to summer and we're like, okay, right, we're fine. We've done all right in the Premier League this year. We've learnt our lessons.
mm,
Now we need to drop some money in the summer and really build and really go for. We won't do it. We won't do it. And we're going to keep getting caught in these little loops of maybe coming back from this. Maybe Ange Postecoglou, and we'll talk about him in a minute in particular, but maybe Ange comes back from this. And I would say I'm completely on the fence. There's just as much of me that can see him actually pulling back from this, taking us up the table in the second half of the season, finishing 10th, which wouldn't be great, but much better than where we are now, 10th or 8th, around there. And then we go into next season, and then we're back in the mix for
mm.
top 6. I can see that, but I can just as clearly see him no longer being our manager by the end of February. It's kind of it's as
Yeah.
simple as that. Um, but what won't change, and we know won't change, is the people who run the club, the people who make the decisions. Because I totally take on board the point that when I am a bit more like, just get rid of Ange, bring in a Iraola, people say, well, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, we'll probably find ourselves in the same place. Even if Iraola does well, we won't back him when it matters, and
Mm.
then that will fall to pieces, and we'll be back where we are. And so it's quite maddening, isn't it, mate? It's quite maddening because I think, we're the same age and we've seen basically this cycle play out, at least like quite clearly we've seen it play out with Yol, Redknapp, Pochettino, and, well, not so much this because I don't think Ange Postecoglou's ever really had a
Yeah.
proper start. But at least 3 times we've seen those cycles get quite good and then just
Mm.
fall by the wayside again. And it's maddening, isn't it, really?
And I think that's where, that sort of puts like strengthening from a position of strength and the sort of apparent lack of interest. Again, they've showed us what they are. They've showed that that isn't the level of investment that they're willing, or the level of risk perhaps as well. Like they don't want to take that risk at those moments. And I don't think it's down to, oh, we just believe that this squad in this guise has enough talent to do it. I think it's just you know, I don't know that it really interests them to that level. And of course, I'm not being sort of a prick about it and denying that Daniel Levy would love to see Spurs win something. Of course he would. Like, of course he would. I don't doubt that he does care enormously. And this, well, I'm sure at the moment it's probably keeping him up at night and he's, questioning himself in certain ways. But I don't know that, if you put a gun to his head and said, what is more important to you, winning a couple of FA Cups or becoming, or, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium being home to the first London NFL franchise, I'm not sure that I'd be able to tell you what his answer would be. Or if pushed, I think his answer would probably be the NFL one, and that would be, a legacy to him that means a bit more. And again, I think, it is better the devil you know, to the point where I don't think I would want to be a Newcastle fan at the moment, for example, or even maybe a City fan, or even a Chelsea fan that sort of went through the Abramovich era. And I've had Chelsea mates that have, admitted having very sort of long dark nights of the soul, celebrating trophies that felt, a bit grubby. But I just, it's that loop, isn't it? It's just that sort of ridiculous, predictable loop that we're on. That just, I think at this point, particularly now that we are, 15th in the table and really, looking quite vulnerable, it just feels like this is ridiculous. Like they are going to surely have to change their ways if they want, something to improve, because it's not even oh well, we're just squeaking into the top four and that's enough for them level of frustration. Now it's like, we're not a very good team, and I'm not saying, and I'm sure we'll get onto this. Like I think we could be a much better team, and we will be a better team once players are back. And I think that we could be set up in a way that would make us a much more efficient, effective football team. But we're certainly not a team that is, when you look at the talent that the teams that are currently sat above us have, we're streets behind a lot of these teams now, I think.
Mm. Mutual friend Tom Foynes has put out a tweet, and there's been a couple of responses along this theme, which essentially Tom's point, his tweet was, when the stadium was delayed, the statement apologised to the NFL, not to the fans. When they said that transfer funds were ring-fenced, they didn't sign anyone for 500 days. When they put the prices up, they said it's the only way to remain competitive. They repeatedly show us who they are. And another guy, Hicksy Dan, said, my favourite one is Levy paying himself a £3 million bonus for delivering the stadium 6 months late and hundreds of millions of pounds over budget, revealed on the exact same day that it was announced that they were furloughing the non-playing staff. I mean, it's just it's horrific, isn't it? I mean, for anyone, because I have considered the side of the opinion and taken it into account a lot that Levy has done a lot of good for the club in many ways, but at the same time, I think the problem for me, mate, is, and the way I can narrow this down now is that there's been points of frustration. I would say, like when you think about like the potential move to Stratford, or you think about the fact that we didn't sign anybody for those 3 windows after like the 16-17 season, when we were as good as that, when we had that team, we were. I mean, look, it's not revising history to say we were that close to winning the Premier League at that point.
Oh,
Like,
and some of it was unfortunate. The timing of the stadium build. The
yeah,
fact that we went unbeaten at White Hart Lane and then demolished it. Like you couldn't make it up. It was.
no,
It's extraordinary that we decided to peak just as we would then give up arguably, one of the biggest advantages you have, a stadium that feels, the players clearly felt at home at, Pochettino adored, everything felt in harmony with us being in that stadium at that time. And then we, give up our huge advantage and have to play at fucking Mordor for 18 months. You can't make some of this stuff up, but
no.
it's just, yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, every time you try and contend that, oh well, Levy has done this, there's always a but, and it's like, oh well, he kept us in Tottenham. We're on the high road still. Our match day rituals remain the same, but they did try and move us to Stratford. There's always a but. There's always
Yeah.
a sort of underlying, slightly grubby, slightly evil thing that you mentioned there.
You almost feel like we've kind of begrudgingly actually stayed on the high road because they realised
Yeah,
that they were running out of time to get this project done, and
yeah,
football
and
was
that
changing.
they'll deny that and all the rest of it, but I'm sure they, considering how arduous a process it was and how much it ended up costing, that would not have been choice number one. I'm sure. I mean, who knows? That's speculation, wild speculation, but it's very easy for us to slip into these. You know, what are the underlying motivations? They're probably a bit nefarious. They're probably not, you know, with the fans in mind at any point during this at all.
And the thing is, and I get, as it probably is for most owners, for most
Yeah,
billionaires
absolutely.
that own
Yeah,
clubs, but the problem is with our particular set of billionaires is that they just don't. And I keep using them as the example, but I just think they are just a perfect comparison to us. Really, is Arsenal. It's a club that has a similar a similar kind of financial footprint to us now. If anything, I think we're slightly more profitable than they are nowadays. Yet they still have their eyes fixed on actually achieving sporting success. And
Mm,
I still can't shake this idea that, like you say, I definitely agree. You know, we saw Levy; he was clearly happy when Spurs made it to the Champions League final. I mean, he bought them all a watch, didn't he? And that got on the got on the wick of Hugo Lloris. But that real sense that we're out, we're going out this season to win the Premier League. Everyone
mm.
else beware. That's never the messaging from the people at the club. It's actually the complete opposite. It's generally always it's very difficult actually where we are. So don't expect too much. But we hope things will be quite good. So that's why we've brought you some talented young players that won't really cost us a fortune in wages. And good luck, Mr. Postecoglou. You know.
Yeah, and that way there are always excuses to be found. That way it's, oh, but the young players are learning. We're building a team. This is a project. This is the start of a project. There's always a sort of something that you can pin the lack of success on. And the Arsenal comparisons will send us all completely loopy, but it is difficult to avoid them. And I think obviously they've had a very similar journey to us in terms of moving away from their home to a new stadium. I was talking to an Arsenal mate, and and they weren't saying this to be dickheads, or at least I don't think they were, but they were like, the sort of difference is that they moved, having won a load of stuff, and they were a sort of successful trophy winning institution by that point. By the time they moved to the Emirates, by the time they got their super club stadium, they had the actual, the CV, the on the pitch CV to prove out the fact that they belonged at the very top, that they were, a global force, a recognizable superpower in football. I can't help but feel that we've skipped a few steps, and that we have tried to sort of, you know, skip to the end and, oh, well, if we build the stadium, a bit sort of Kevin Costner, I guess, but like, if you build the stadium, it will come. And, everything else, if we sign up to the Super League, then that must mean that we are a super club. If we do these things, if we bring the NFL in, that will mean that, the success on the pitch will come too. And I obviously understand the reasons why you do these sort of revenue generating sort of schemes, and you buddy up with the NFL and F1 and whoever else and Beyonce, and and I don't actually have any issues with that. I think, as someone that lived in Tottenham for a long time, what we've done as a club, albeit perhaps grudgingly at times, to make Tottenham a more visitable place is actually commendable. But that's, I suppose, not here nor there right now. But I just can't help but avoid, you know, always it feels like we're not willing to actually like go that extra yard to prove out that we are a super club. Like, we've got the stadium, we've got the training facilities, sure. Beyonce does 7 nights, amazing. The NFL sign a long-term contract, F1 get into bed with us. All of this stuff's great, but it doesn't change anything. It's not really worked in terms of making the team any better. So, but then I come back to like, do they care? Like, is that anything that bothers them? I feel like, as so long as, I think this bothers them, I think being 15th bothers them, but I think where we were for a number of years, massively in the race for top four, more often than not being in the Champions League, being involved in conversations, if not actually, being top of the tree, that I think was fine. That was the extent of the ambition, and I think they proved that over time. And look, maybe we'll look back, and I think we already are looking back at the sort of Pochettino era. I mean, Christ, I was like waxing lyrical about that first Conte season the other day. So it's amazing. It's amazing how quickly you can,
Yeah.
sort of rose tint these things. But
Yeah.
I look back at the Pochettino years now, and I'm like, actually, it's not bullshit to say that. Obviously, there were disappointments, but you and I were, going to games a lot. We were having so much fun during that time. Like, it was amazing. And I don't sort of therefore look back and go, oh, well, Levy necessarily failed. But it is just agonizing to be like, had they just taken that extra push, been that little bit bolder, cared a bit more about spending that extra bit of cash, then, Christ, we could be sat here with memories 10 times more gorgeous.
Do you know, like one of the kind of curveballs I throw in at this point that is something that sometimes occurs to me, and it has been a lot more so recently, is that there could be like another option in all this where it's like it's not so much about like Levy, his focus on sporting success, as in it's not represented by how much he's spending on the team and so on and so forth. Maybe like because we hear a lot from various interviews or journos and such down the years about what Daniel Levy's ego is like, and whatever. I'm not here to pass judgment on that. He's obviously a very successful chap, and he's a very intelligent guy. He's obviously motivated by his success and his power that he has and what he's built. There is that option that it's like it's not so much that he isn't bothered about winning. It's not so much that he won't spend that big money. That there's a sense maybe for me that he almost wants his Levy-nomics, if you like, to be
Mm,
validated. That
yeah.
he almost wants to show to people, told you all I could do it. I told you I could do it this way, as opposed to having to go out and buy Declan Rice or,
Mm,
go out and buy or at least pay Erling Haaland £300,000 a week or whatever it is they pay him. I told you I could do it this way. I always knew I could, and I've done it now. And
yeah.
that's kind of the worry for me that it's not a negligence, it's not a lack of caring, that it's actually maybe more like
A
this
stubborn,
almost mad
yeah.
confessor stuff, right? Like
Mm.
it really could be that, I would say there's enough to show you that could be the case as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the cynicism I've had around that apparent investment that seemed to be on its way from the Amanda Staveley group. And, that I think felt very off to me because it would be him sort of admitting, and maybe that does happen and, who knows, but for him to sort of admit that he needs outside investment to get Tottenham over the line, I don't know that that does. I think you potentially got it in one there. I think that sort of stubborn refusal to bend to you know almost sort of cheating in his eyes, like, oh well, anyone can just throw money at the problem, but what we're trying to do here is create something special and do it with young talent. And again, like, such is the way that we veer from one sort of project to the next, that that doesn't really stack up either, because there's no commitment to anything really, which is maybe sort of brings us on to this project, right? In the sense that you know it, in some ways it's really shocking to me that Postecoglou still has a job. I think that you and I were chatting throughout the game yesterday, and I think at half time most people would have guessed that that was it for him. But
Yeah.
I think that, for a few reasons, and maybe the project reason is sort of bottom of it, I think injuries probably, come nearer the top, in the sense that surely there is that understanding that he is playing with a sort of very weakened hand at the moment, and it's incredibly tough for him. But, perhaps there is that, well, I need to sort of see this out. I need to give this project every opportunity to, you know, to see if it will take us somewhere. Because I guess when it works, as we've seen at Old Trafford, as we've seen at the Etihad, as we've seen, the other week, even when we beat Liverpool and it all kind of clicked, there are, there are days and evenings where you think, okay, this, we're onto something here. And it's just, maddening that there are also days where, even with all the injuries, I watch us and I simply cannot believe the way that we're being sent out to play football. It's just absolutely mind blowing. I've seen primary school games that seem to have more coordinated thought behind them than some of the Tottenham Hotspur matches I've watched this season. It's incredible to me how we can go from one to another. But hey, that's Ange ball, I guess.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Because, like you say, at half time yesterday, I was like, that genuinely is it. I can't sit on the fence anymore. It has to go. Like, even if it's not all his fault, it's clearly done.
Enough of it kind of is, and that's, I think, where I
Yeah.
probably still am. Like, enough of it is his fault. Like, even even though they're tired, even though he's not got many options, I do still look at the team sometimes and I'm like, well, Porro is a Spain international. Like Dragusin, all right, he might not be suited necessarily to this style of football, but we got him from under the noses of Bayern Munich. He's, played exceptionally well in Serie A and international tournaments. Jed Spencer's sort of become arguably our best player in recent weeks. These aren't like these aren't idiots that are being put
No.
out there, and all right, they might be tired and in need of a rest on certain games, but you know, the the naivety, and I don't want to sound like Jamie Carragher about it, but it's just watching the derby particularly where you know Kinski, Gray, and Spence were just sort of locked in a little triangle of doom, having to sort of just tippy tappy passes to each other in that corner of the pitch with not a left foot between them, because you've got three right-footed players, well, certainly two right-footed defenders having to be shoehorned into left-sided defensive roles and still asked to just pass their way out of trouble. It's just, I just think that's just silly. That's not sticking to your principles. That's not, oh, well, if we get this into their DNA, then we'll come out the other side stronger and the players will know to be bold on the ball no matter what. And that will, set them up for success in the long run. That's just kamikaze suicide football. That's ridiculous. That at best, you're winning a throw. At best. At worst, and as we saw happen on numerous occasions against Arsenal, you're basically going to cough the ball up in a position where they're in on goal. It's just, and we see it week after week after week, and that's where I'm like, I have a certain level of sympathy for you, Ange, but I'm kind of shocked that he's still here. I am, and I think if it wasn't perhaps for the Solanke injury, I feel like that was maybe the bit where Levy was like, oh. Yeah, I feel a bit sorry for him now. If Solanke's kicked a ball in training and is now out for 6 weeks, maybe, yeah.
Even on that though, there's certain little things that frustrate me. I mean, it seems to be, there's some disagreement really about football, but disagreement as to what's led to this Solanke injury. But there's still a part of you that thinks you had him playing on 3G for 60 minutes. Right. And whatever you think about Will Lancashire and how he responded, again, checks notes away at Galatasaray,
where he scored. Yeah.
You're honestly telling me he couldn't have had a few minutes against Tamworth.
And maybe, you bring Solanke on for extra time. I agree. I think that,
and it's things like that, there's decisions like that where I do think I get that, I get the situation he's been dealt with, the squad and everything like that. But I mean, look, let's not forget as well, let's not let him off the hook. He's only really started playing Jed Spence because he's absolutely had to, because he's had no other option. And I've seen it floated. People have said, well, actually, maybe you should give him his dues that he's actually waited until he thought Jed Spence was ready. Come on, man. That's nonsense. We know, I'm sure we all know that's not true. He didn't fancy Jed Spence, really. The club gave Jed Spence a new contract because we didn't want to lose him for free. And we thought we could get some value out of him. So again, that's why Jed Spence signed a new contract at the start of the season. But he's got him playing. But what we inevitably land on with this conversation, Charlie, is that if we see the crest on the side of the stadium picture gets posted. It's with a heavy heart that, I mean, it's never that emotional, is it really? Our goodbyes to managers, but the club has decided to part ways with Ange Postecoglou. Announcement comes out essentially. What next? Who we're not going to get Iraola, for example, in the middle of a season. People can argue all they want as to whether he'd come at the end of the season or not. Why would he leave Bournemouth for Spurs? I mean, there's millions and millions of reasons why he'd do that. But right now, it wouldn't be, from what I understand, a lot of people are saying, well, is Ryan Mason going to do any better? From what I understand, it would be Matty Wells that would, if we were going internally for our caretaker role, if you like, Matty Wells is the second in command now to do that. Because that's what we might be looking at. there's some talk that Allegri might be this kind of maybe a Gus Hiddink caretaker,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
a
I mean,
complete
would
different style
Allegri
of big
be up
shift,
for
isn't it?
doing like a 6 month contract? Like he feels like he'd be looking for a bigger commitment than that. But I don't know. I mean, it would be in some ways Allegri makes a ton of sense because we do like to lurch from one sort of mentality to another in terms of the manager profile. But I don't know, and I think that they. I mean, I think if they don't, well, I think they could lose to Hoffenheim and beat Leicester, and I think he'd still be in a job. I think if he sort of say he like draws in Germany, but then also draws or loses against Leicester, I think he's gone. I think that he's got to beat Leicester. If we beat Leicester, there's what likely to be 11 points between us. I can't believe I'm saying these words, but there will likely be 11 points between us and Ipswich because Ipswich have got Liverpool away. 11 points, feels a lot better, right? Like that's you can kind of relax again a bit in terms of really looking over your shoulder at the bottom three. Whereas if you're losing to Leicester, who have lost 7 Premier League games in a row or something, they're utterly abysmal. Then I think he's gone. Like absolutely, just he's probably sacked in the dressing room after the game. And then I don't know. I think none of us would know. And I think that in all likelihood, he probably would have already. I think he'd be gone if there was an attractive option. I think just based on the way that we've tended to operate, they clearly like to be talking to their sort of next boyfriend whilst figuring out how to dump the current one. And I just don't reckon there's anyone there that they see as I don't think there it is a kind of, oh well, we need to let Ange play out his project and maybe it will all come together and they can turn it around to win the Europa League. I think it is just as simple as they probably don't think Allegri is the right answer really in their heart of hearts because he was pretty bad when he went back to Juve. I've seen, was it Terzic? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Dortmund guy
Yeah.
that got let go. He doesn't seem to be the sort of sure bet that you would want to, ditch a manager for
Also sounds like
mid-season.
he's the type of personality that Daniel Levy wouldn't
Yeah.
particularly go for.
So, but then it is like well, who is that sort of silver bullet of a coach? I think Iraola feels like to most of us that he bears the hallmarks of a Poch 2.0, and he's at a nice South Coast club finishing school, and he's had good experience in the Spanish league and is playing a sort of front foot style of football. But like I was saying earlier, I think the league is a bit different now. I think that he could very happily decide. He could get Bournemouth into Europe this season, and say they get into the Conference League, they'll be favourites next season to win it. And what a lovely thing for him to be able to deliver a European trophy to Bournemouth. I mean, incredible. So
And I mean, the thing is, like for all that we can say, because I do, there is definitely a law to managing Tottenham Hotspur. Like we're a London club, we're a huge historic club, and everything like that. But at the same time, to your point, football is very different now, and I think the fact that one of the things that's always like pulled out by people is, yeah, is he going to stay playing? What is it? Bournemouth Stadium capacity is about 11,000 or something, and it's kind of the stick that's always used to beat them. But mate, like they're one of those clubs that have been almost like covertly taken over by billionaires not long ago, who
yeah,
spend loads and loads of money. Like they
really and
spend,
really smartly. Like
yeah,
the players they've signed are all, and why not just stay on that train for a bit longer? I think we need to find our own one. I think that's the thing, right? Is that you don't just need these sort of Premier League finishing schools to sort of train up our coaches for us. I think where's our version of that guy? Like, what's he doing right now? And have we got eyes on him? I don't know enough about the sort of young or up and coming managerial talent in those divisions to really offer an expert opinion, but they must be out there. And those are the talents, the sort of profiles that surely they need to be considering, because it's tough to like what other types of coaches are there. They clearly didn't fancy Potter because I think again they would have moved for him had they fancied him. I think I mean, you and I have speculated about this, but I reckon Tuchel was probably one that they fancied, and
yeah,
England just
big
got there
time.
first. And I'm sure if he hadn't have taken that England job, he would be in conversations right now had he not got the
Tuchel
United job.
he's flirted with us a bit down the years as well, hasn't
Yeah,
he? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, as galling as it would have been going for another sort of ex Chelsea boss, I think I probably could have seen the logic there, but I don't know. I I'm out of ideas in terms of what they do mid-season, and honestly, I think I'd just be very intrigued to see what they do at the end of this season if things
Yeah.
don't sort of turn around, because it wasn't like we found it easy to find someone 2 summers ago. I mean, there was that long drawn out period of all sorts of names being thrown up. We thought Slot was coming at one point, and he turned us down. All sorts of things happened to not get us where we wanted to go. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's no other option. I think unless they lose to Leicester, this is what we're dealing with. I mean, on to be a bit more glass half full, I do think, as you mentioned just now, like there's maybe a world in which you could argue that Romero and Van der Ven come back, Vicario comes back in February, Udogi comes back. Hopefully, they come back in half decent nick, find some form relatively quickly. I know Bentancur's not flavour of the month for obvious reasons, but I think he just being fit for an extended period of time, sort of making that sort of number 6 role his, could very easily be a huge boost for us. You've got Mikey Moore, could potentially be one of those, kind of saviour figures that come in age 17, give the season a lift, comes off the bench, gives us a spark. If we do enter into a world where you can start to split minutes between Solanke and a useful looking Richarlison who perhaps somehow avoids injury for the rest of the season, so you can maybe see a world in which they cobble together enough points in the league to really then concentrate efforts on Europe. Who knows? Like stranger things have happened where a sort of reborn Ange Tottenham, go to, where is it, Bilbao, and walk away with the Europa. I'm calling it. We're going to win the Europa. We're going to win the Europa
But,
League.
but this would pose quite a conundrum for Levy and for Enoch if we do end up finishing 15th or whatever, but we win a League Cup. Or I mean, it should be, to be honest, it should be less of a conversation. If we win a Europa League, I would say he's shown enough to suggest that he gets another season for us because
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
a
definitely.
major, it's a
Oh,
major
yeah.
win. That a League Cup though, like it
Mm,
poses more of a difficult thing. But just whilst we've been recording, Matt Law, everybody's favourite, has written for the Telegraph that he's essentially made the point that the Tottenham hierarchy are influenced. Their decision not to sack Ange is influenced by the fact that they don't see many viable candidates out there to take over, just as we're talking about right now.
mm,
And it's funny at the moment because it does feel like Levy's going a bit Surkov with all this in terms of one day we're getting this news report that all is rosy, everybody's happy with Ange, they all love him. The next day it's he's got the Leicester game and the whatever it is Hoffenheim game to
mm.
save his job. The next minutes later we're hearing that actually he would be sacked were it not for the fact that there's nobody else to take over. And it is difficult. It's difficult. I had Adam Nathan on the pod a couple of weeks ago now, and we sort of arrived at this point where we're both sort of quite unhappy with Ange and what he's done to this point in many respects. But also, were he to just get the boot, it would be tinged with a certain sadness. It wouldn't
Mm.
be. I was quite gleeful when we got rid of Conte because I really couldn't stand the sight of him by the end. And
And also he couldn't stand the sight of us
of
by that
course,
point as well, right? So it was a
exactly.
mutual, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a mutual thing.
But like with Ange, like as much as I get it, I know like he can be quite prickly with journalists, and he sort of carries himself in a way that can rub people up the wrong way and everything. I don't really get the feeling that like he wants anything other than to succeed at Tottenham. That he really,
Oh
really
yeah,
wants to be a success here, and he
it's a
really
huge. It's
is
his shot,
relishing
right?
this
It's
opportunity,
yeah,
isn't it?
it's
Like,
his big shot that he's worked his entire life towards, and I think I think he wants nothing more than to create the sort of environment that he probably had at Celtic, right, where there was that
yeah,
real connection between him and the fans, the players and the fans. It's a lot easier to do at Celtic, of course, when you're spending, your wage bills, what, like 30 million more than your nearest competitor, I think it is. But, that's probably really wrong. So don't come for me, Scottish football fans. But, it's very different in this environment. I would be sort of quietly, yeah, very upset. I think that, it's because it also, it started so well and there was such a hope that, and I think back to the first 10 games of last season and think actually Levy was so lucky. I mentioned earlier about essentially not replacing Harry Kane at all, and we all just sort of forgot about that because we were all just giddy with being top of the league and playing this kind of
yeah,
freewheeling style of football. And actually I think we all should have been a lot madder about the fact that we were being left so short even back then. But it felt like it didn't matter because he was creating this collective and this style of football that we hadn't really seen before. And and even during last season, I think we could sort of convince ourselves that the only reason it went off the rails was because the Chelsea game and the injuries, and it all just went up in a puff of smoke that wasn't our making. This season, you can kind of do the same, and it's just felt like this sort of tragic, like, well, it's a bit of a tragic comedy at this point, isn't it? It's like everything that
yeah.
could go wrong for him is kind of going wrong, but he's also, you know, being a bit of a buffoon at times, I think, and just playing into people's hands and being so stubborn. We've mentioned the word stubborn a few times, and I think he's also an incredibly stubborn individual that's not making his own life very easy at all.
No, he's not. I think I don't know. One of the things that will get me about it is just sometimes it's just like just. And I say this fully knowing how tetchy I can be, right? But I'm not a Premier League manager. I'm not out there in that kind of role. It does just surprise me how we even saw it after the game yesterday, getting into those ridiculous squabbles with the BBC guy who said same old story, or he said
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that, didn't he? Which, a lot of people are playing out like, God, what a vile thing to say to him. I mean,
Oh,
it's
but I
just
would, I
shorthand
would say that the
thing.
WhatsApp groups I have with groups of friends that aren't all Spurs, that was the thing that they picked up on in terms of like he's got to have a bit more, he's got to understand that this is sort of part of the job. If you're a
Yeah.
Premier League manager, you're going to have to answer tough questions immediately after you've just had a miserable result, and you have to just take it on the chin. You can't pout and get all grisly every time someone doesn't. And I think maybe because he was welcomed into English football on this wave of, oh, he's such a breath of fresh air, and he speaks so brilliantly and from the heart, and this isn't anyone of the like we've seen in the game for years and years, and he's also playing this buccaneering style of football that's winning hearts and minds of neutrals. He kind of had this really easy intro to the Premier League, I think, and maybe that's meant that when the knives have come out a bit for him, and I don't even think it's been that, it's that hardcore really. I just think he's not doing himself again like any favors at all by being so kind of pouty about what is pretty easy treatment, really. I think.
I know, just like I don't know, just make your own life a bit easier, lad. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, like the Bournemouth, and it's not to excuse the abuse. So I've made this point on here before, but stomping over to the away end at Bournemouth to have it out with them, mate. Just pack it in, lad. Like, just I get it. I get that that's the fire in your belly, and that's kind of what makes you you. But also, like we've all been in a position in our lives. Like I know I have, for example, like there is that fire that makes me me, but also there are certain jobs or situations that I enter where I'm like, I just need to curb that side of myself a bit.
Yeah,
you know?
just get
Like,
through the tricky situation. Just
yeah.
navigate that period of your I mean, for me, and maybe this is me clinging on to things that are not important in the grand scheme of things, but the where I lost an awful lot of my Ange sort of loyalty, or would back him up sort of endlessly,
Oh, don't
was.
trigger me again, Charlie. Don't. I
But
know what
it,
you're
it
going to say.
was it was the Man City Arsenal thing,
Yeah.
and I think that I'm kind of amazed that we as a fan base sort of allowed that to pass quite so freely, and maybe it was just the utter relief we felt that we hadn't actually given Arsenal the title, and we were so completely consumed by that relief that nothing else really mattered. But I just felt like the lack of emotional compassion he felt to us as a fan base for a manager that really seems to promote this idea that he is just a fan who's still understands what it is to be a fan, and he's come up through the footballing coaching ranks and blah blah blah. That really stuck in my core, and I feel like that for me, when the day comes when you do get the cockerel on the side of the stadium, and it's with regret we have to announce that we've parted ways with Ange Postecoglou. I must admit that'll be the thing that stops me from feeling too devastated. But again, I don't know, man. Like, I just got a feeling about this season. I don't think we're actually going to get into a relegation battle. I really don't think that it's going to get that bad.
I
I
mean,
think
fingers crossed, mate.
I do. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
And I've just got a feeling about the Europa League. I just think that if we cannot, well, I suppose even if we lose these two last group games, we'll probably end up at worst in that playoff thing. And then hopefully enough players are back by the time we play that, then the team we play isn't all that we'll get through to the knockouts.
I
And then who
mean,
knows?
Hoffenheim are 15th, mate. They've won 4 games in the Bundesliga all season. Like,
and they're still
come on.
15th. God.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we'll see, right? I mean, who's he going to play? Like, you can't play Spence, you can't play Regulon, you can't play Kinski. It's going to be
Wow.
I mean, I
I
think
forgot about,
Bentancur might be back.
I forgot about Spence in the Europa League. I forgot entirely about that nightmare, mate. Like,
I mean, yeah, you talk about just chaos having been across the entire season. I mean, that decision
oh,
just mad. I mean, even like, there are times where I've looked up in the stadium and seen, a left wing of Sergio Reguilon and Timo Werner, and just wondered like, what are we
yeah,
watching? It's just,
yeah.
watching us try and
Sergio,
cling on for a draw at home to Wolves, 19th place Wolves, with Werner and Reguilon sort of manning the left wing. It's just like, how has it come to this?
I seem to recall, I think your message at the time to me was, I'm just watching Sergio Reguilon about to come on in 2025. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's
It's
just,
just
it is quite wild, isn't it? Like,
what
it
I
is quite
mean.
wild.
Yeah, and I think you have to, and I like to think, and I was trying to say this to sort of non-Spurs friends this morning that were clearly trying to like egg me on into a rant. I was like, we do thrive in this situation. I think us Spurs fans, we've been here before. We are essentially, I think, quite messy bitches that really do well in these periods of ridiculous nonsense, and we secretly quite enjoy it, I think, as well. If we're being completely honest, I think that, yeah, all right, it gets us all riled up, and we like to send each other long messages of frustration in our WhatsApp groups. But I also just like, there's something about this sort of fucking nonsense that just gets me like right into my, I don't know, like I kind of secretly get something out of it, and almost like perversely want to see, like, how are we going to get out of this one? Like, how
Yeah,
bad's it going to get? Like, what are they going to do next? Like, we mentioned earlier, like, who in the Gregor Raziak's, annals of terrible signings are we going to pull out of the hat in the next 15 days? Like, I don't know. Like, ultimately, football's football, and I suppose I'd rather be entertained, even if it was through utter farce, than just like, it being really boring. But maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better. I don't know.
I had this. Talking about Hoffenheim, I'd forgotten I'd watched their highlights against Bayern the other day, and just seeing Kane sort of trotting about again. It was one of the first times where I think there's been enough time passed now where I actually really am now like, Oh man, I miss him. Like I miss having that geezer that you knew pretty much every single game was going to score a goal for you. And
Well, I mean
it's mad, isn't it?
that's
You
the
know?
thing. I've been quite, I think, hard on Solanke this season, and you and I have spoken about, oh, is he an elite striker? Can you really count on him? In the dying seconds, if he's through on goal, and you get one chance, is he that guy? But we were just spoilt in a way that it wasn't even fair for us to be expected to appreciate in the during that period. Like, we had basically a decade of, in my opinion, the best striker in the world playing for us, and caring deeply about us, and wanting to make it work in a way that we didn't really deserve for many years. And yeah, like, there were matches where we were probably as bad as we have been this season, but we would just get out of trouble because,
Yeah.
and also, as much as I sort of hate to admit it, and how close I hold Sonny to my heart, but for whatever reason, and hopefully it's not a forever reason, but we would have a very different version of the Sonny that we're watching now, and Harry Kane, just to dig us out of hole after hole after hole. And we don't have that right now. We have at best sort of Kulusevski to try and, through sheer force of will, sort of get us through certain matches. But really, I mean, that's the problem. I think we've taken the stardust out of our team, and I was listening to your pod yesterday earlier, and that's sort of, we don't have that talent anymore. We don't. We've got some potential. We've got a lot of, I could absolutely see Lucas Bergvall in a couple of years, storming through midfields and picking a perfect through ball to Mikey Moore to finish to win a North London derby. But that's asking an awful lot of them to do that in the here and now when they're 18 and 17. Like,
Yeah.
we're just building around these sort of building blocks that are, tiny babies. It's mad. Like, we shouldn't be looking to Mikey Moore to, be coming off the bench and changing matches for us. It's great that I think he will do that now, but how did we end up in this place? It's wild.
It is quite wild, mate. And the thing is, I would love to sort of have a more positive note to end on, but at the moment, I
I've
don't
just
really
said we're
want
going
to
to
go
win the
for it.
Europa League, mate. Don't worry
There
about
you
it.
go.
I've given
There
us
you
our
go.
positive.
There you go. We're going to win the Europa League, and just going to turn this all around, and we can all live happily ever after. But look, no, I think it's been really good chatting to you today, mate. It's been a really, I don't know. I think the tone and the mood around the club right now just it demands this type of conversation where we just really kind of just try and make sense of
Mm,
what it is that's happening at Spurs and everything, as opposed to kind of projecting best case scenarios onto stuff. And I think we've managed to do that without being too kind of without catastrophizing too much. So look, well, let's take that as a positive. We're winning Europa League, and we haven't turned into AFTV. So
there you go. Job done.
that's good. But appreciate your time this afternoon, Charlie, and yeah, thanks a lot, mate. I
It's
sort of
been a
said thank
pleasure.
you
It's been a
twice now, didn't I?
pleasure. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. I'll see you in Bilbao. Good stuff.